We are going to continue our talk about Mexico as a country with a brief history of the pre-Columbian era. Pre-Columbian meaning before Columbus allegedly discovered America in 1492. So this is stuff leading from before then and leading up to that era before the European um, invasion of the Americas. So outline what we'll be talking about in this presentation will be natives of Mexico, the search for capital city, which is kind of a big deal in Mexican legend and tradition, the flag. There's a reason it is the way it is, and it's kind of coincides with the search for the capital, so we'll talk about that. Calendar confusion, we'll dive deeper into exactly what that means, obviously, and then a thriving civilization. The civilization that's obviously the most famous with Mexico is the Aztecs, so we'll talk a little bit about them here today. And again, this is all stuff that is before the Europeans arrived to the Americas. So, natives of Mexico. So, very obviously, you have the Aztecs and the Mayans that are very big there, but there was also some other important ones to know. Um, Over the years, you had the Olmec civilization that were around from about 1600 BC to 350 BC, which is um, before before history or BC before Christ is as it's also known. Um, yeah, the Aztecs, which were around about 500 AD to 1521 AD, and we'll talk a lot more about them moving forward here. The Mayan civilization, 2000 BC to present day, and we'll talk about how they're different. Um, and then you have the Tarascans, which were around the time of the Aztecs and became a very important player with the Aztec situation. So we'll talk about them as well. So just a little more info here through some pictures. The Olmecs. You have these giant Olmec stone heads found in Mexico to this day. Very little is known about the Olmecs other than they were there. There's not a lot of written record about them. The only thing that's really survived has been these giant stone heads. They are anywhere from 4 to 11 feet tall and can weigh up to 20 tons. So if you can just kind of imagine how big those things are, they're pretty massive. Um, you have some Aztec warriors here, which again we'll talk more about. The Mayans and their temple, big Mayan civilizations in southern Mexico. And then you have just some Tarascan art here that represents one of the final groups that we're going to be talking about. So with this presentation, we're going to be focused more on the Aztec portion of the pre-Columbian era. Um, so that'll be the gist or the majority of what we're going to be talking about. So, the founding of a capital. This is the founding of Tenochtitlan, which is the ancient Aztec capital. It is an Aztec creation myth. Basically, what it is nomadic people looking for a place to settle. Um, and I'm going to kind of just paraphrase everything that we're talking about. That's seen here. You can read this more specifically, pause the video, do whatever you got to do. But it is believed that there were people who lived north of what is today Mexico or Mexico City um, that were nomadic people, nomads meaning people that wandered. So there were people that wandered north of what is now Mexico, and they were told by their gods that if they went in search of a permanent settlement, in other words, no longer be nomadic roamers, that they would be able to find this beautiful city and build a thriving civilization and no longer have to wander the earth. So it is believed that these Aztlan people started immigrating from the north in the 6th century, so about the 500s. And they worked their way south, and the creation myth states that um, the god of sun and the god of war in their culture had told them to find a place where an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus devouring a snake would be, and that's where they would build their new capital and become um, the most powerful empire in Mesoamerica. And if snake eating, this snake being eaten by an eagle on a cactus sounds familiar, it is because it is on the flag. Um, if you look at the coat of arms that is on the flag, it is an eagle on a prickly pear cactus eating a snake, which is exactly what these people were told that they were going to find, and that's where they were going to create their new capital city. So if you look at it, today the coat of arms is in the center of the flag, showing an eagle eating a rattlesnake perched on a nopal prickly pear cactus. Underneath is a garland. On the left is green oak as a symbol of strength, and the right is a laurel branch symbolizing victory. The flag pays homage to the founding of the ancient Aztec capital. Um, what people fail to realize is that this capital was founded in the middle of a lake, so it was kind of like what Venice, Italy is today, is a city built in canals, and that is where they built their civilization, their capital. We'll talk more about their capital later on. A little more with the Aztecs. So a lot of you were kind of young when this all happened, but there was this big thing that took place in 2012 where people thought that this on the left-hand side was a Mayan calendar, but what they were really looking at was an Aztec calendar. This is what a Mayan calendar on the right looks like, but the one everybody was referencing during this thing in 2012 was this Aztec calendar, which is a lot more intricate. People thought that this calendar was kind of a bad omen. The calendar, according to researchers, was supposed to end in January or December of 2012, meaning that people thought that 2012 would be the end of the world. Um, but obviously, as we know now in 2020, that's not the case. Um, the true meaning of this is unknown. The only thing we know for sure is that this calendar ended in 2012, likely because the fall of these civilizations kind of stopped us from knowing the truth. There's not a lot of records left behind, not a lot of people who can explain exactly what this is, so people are left to speculate, and speculation led to panic, and panic led to a bunch of nonsense, which ended up being just that, nonsense. A thriving civilization. So once the Aztecs settled in the Central Valley of present-day Mexico and built their city, in the 1300s, is when they settled into Mexico's valley. The capital of Tenochtitlan was officially founded in 1325. At its peak, it had 5 million people total, the Aztec civilization, with 300,000 people living just in the capital alone. Now, if you think about the size of this at the time, the 1300s, this made it about the size of Paris, which is one of the biggest cities in the world today, let alone in the 1300s. It was a very complex society. They were very advanced in math and science. They had a class system, meaning levels. You had poor people, rich people. It was based on wealth and religion. The high religious people were valued the most. If you had money or property or any other thing of value, you were higher in the rankings. And then they also had people who were slaves, who were the lower level types of people. This civilization also had a lot of waterways and roads that were very advanced and intricate for the time. We'll dive deeper into those later on. It was also a warrior nation. They loved to take over land and fight. They had a very large and well-trained army from a very young age. Aztec men and Aztec boys were taught to fight, and some of them were professional soldiers, and that's the only life they knew. They had this wooden machete type of weapon right here that you see at the top of the screen. It doesn't look like much right now, but these little black notches are treated with fire, and these are very sharp, very glass-like, very strong. These were used to slash opponents. Um, and if you think about again, the 1300s in a very considered to be uncivilized area, that's a pretty advanced weapon for the time in an area where there's not a lot of swords, not a lot of any other types of weaponry. This was a very advanced weapon for its era. And then you had Moctezuma, this man right here on the bottom of the screen, he was the emperor of the Aztec people and the leader of them. He was a very eccentric type figure even for that era, and we'll talk more about him as we go. So that kind of brings us to the end of the Aztec people and the pre-Columbian era. Please make sure you're answering all your questions, and we'll pick up with some of the other civilizations later in the week.